3 Vorak warships materialized near Jupiter, each 10 miles long and built like dark metal insects. Their demand was simple: surrender Earth within 1 day or face annihilation. But humanity's response wasn't fear, it was mathematics. They declared Earth belonged to humans, and if the Vorak wanted it, they'd have to take it. Commander Tsar observed the small blue world from his command deck. He had crushed 17 civilizations in a single century. Each one had yielded within hours of his arrival. Their histories showed these humans were fractured into competing tribes, bound by nothing but primitive emotions. He expected immediate surrender. The Vorak transmission arrived as a cascade of prime numbers and coordinate data. It contained no words, only mathematical proofs demonstrating their superior firepower and orbital dominance. The message ended with a precise countdown: 24 standard hours until planetary bombardment. This was their language of conquest, refined through generations of successful subjugation. Earth's reply used the same mathematical syntax but framed a different proposition. Instead of surrender coordinates, human analysts returned a conditional probability matrix. It calculated the exact resource cost of taking Earth by force versus the assured mutual destruction of both fleets. The number suggested the Vorak would lose more ships than in all their previous campaigns combined. Tsar's subordinate Sector produced a low grinding sound from his thoracic plates. The vibration echoed through the command deck. It was their species' equivalent of derisive laughter. They had witnessed primitive species attempt defiance before. Emotional outbursts, desperate pleas, even misguided counter-threats. But never this. Never a cool, calculated revision of their own calculus. The humans hadn't refused. They had recalculated. Sector's amusement faded as the implications settled. These were not the reactive, fear-driven creatures their intelligence profiles described. Their response demonstrated group coordination, advanced mathematics, and a chilling willingness to accept massive casualties. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by the silent assessment of a predator encountering unexpected resistance. Tsar studied the human message a second time. The mathematical notation was flawless, the logic unassailable. They hadn't just rejected his ultimatum, they had rewritten the equation of engagement. Their defiance wasn't emotional, it was intellectual, and it carried the weight of a species that knew exactly what it was protecting. The clock continued its count toward annihilation, but the terms had shifted. The Vorak expected terrified submission from a divided species. They received a unified mathematical argument from a civilization that had already decided the cost was worth paying. Humanity's first weapon wasn't a missile or a shield. It was their quiet refusal to accept the premise of their own defeat. They communicated not in threats but in probabilities. Not in fear but in resolve. Sector finally broke the silence on the command deck. He asked whether they should begin weapons calibration early. Tsar shook his head slowly. The humans had changed the game. Their response demanded a recalibration of something far more important than targeting systems. The Vorak had come expecting to collect a planet. They would first have to solve for humanity. Captain Jake Morrison watched the tactical display fill with active vessels. 42 ships materialized as sharp blue icons. Across the void, 3 red markers pulsed. They represented the Vorak warships. Each one dwarfed his entire fleet combined. His command deck smelled of recycled air and ozone. The lighting cast sharp shadows across his console. The Earth Defense Fleet wasn't a proper navy. It was an emergency assembly of deep space tugs, asteroid miners, and repurposed orbital shuttles. Some still carried civilian registration codes. Their hulls were thin. Their engines were built for efficiency, not combat maneuvers. They carried improvised weapons mounted on external hardpoints. This was everything humanity could scramble in 24 hours. A direct assault would last seconds. The Vorak ships carried primary beam weapons that could vaporize continents. Their point defense systems could track and eliminate thousands of targets simultaneously. Standard military doctrine called for matching force with force. That doctrine assumed you had forces to match. Morrison rejected standard doctrine. He keyed his comm to Lieutenant Amy Foster. Foster's voice came through crisp and calm. She coordinated the fleet dispersal from her tactical station. Her screens showed velocity vectors and engagement zones. She divided the ships into 3 attack groups without hesitation. Each group received specific coordinates and timing parameters. Her commands flowed in steady succession. There was no room for error. Alpha Group consisted of 12 ships with upgraded sensor jammers and electromagnetic pulse emitters. Their mission was to approach from the solar side. They would blast the Vorak sensors with interference patterns. The goal was temporary blindness, not destruction, confusion. Beta Group included 18 mining vessels retrofitted with cutting lasers and kinetic penetrators. They would hit the weapon ports along the Vorak hulls. Their targets were the vulnerable openings where energy beams emerged. They needed to disable the weapons, not breach the armor. Precision strikes at close range. Charlie Group drew the worst assignment. 6 fast courier ships would swing behind the moon. They would emerge suddenly, firing everything they had. Their job was to draw the Vorak attention and fire. They were the bait. Their survival probability calculations were bleak. Every pilot accepted the mission without comment. This was not a battle of fleets meeting in formation. It was asymmetrical warfare scaled to space. The human ships were too small to appear as primary threats on Vorak targeting systems. They would attack like parasites on large animals, nipping at eyes, crawling into ears, exploiting the fact that giants rarely notice insects until they start to sting. Morrison gave the execute command. The words felt heavy in his throat. He watched the blue icons scatter across his display. They moved not as a fleet but as a swarm. Each ship followed its own trajectory. Their paths looked random to an untrained eye. To Morrison, they formed a perfect pattern of coordinated chaos. The Vorak warships maintained position. They did not adjust their formation. They did not launch interceptors. They simply waited. Their sensors tracked the approaching vessels as minor anomalies. The scale difference was so vast they likely registered as space debris or sensor ghosts. 42 ships became 42 individual problems. They accelerated on different vectors. Their engines burned at maximum output. They left faint trails of ionized particles in the void. The distance between them and the Vorak ships closed rapidly. Morrison watched the timer count down to first contact. His display showed the complex dance of trajectories. Foster monitored each group's status. She made minor course corrections with quick keystrokes. Her face showed concentration, not fear. The fleet completed its dispersal. The ships were now too far apart for visual contact. They communicated through tight beam lasers and encrypted bursts. Each captain knew their role. Each understood the stakes. They moved into the shadow of Jupiter's gravity well. The giant planet provided some sensor cover. Its magnetic field scrambled long-range targeting. The human ships used every natural advantage available. Morrison finally looked away from his display. He met the eyes of his bridge crew. They nodded silently. They understood. This was their only play. This was how the small fight the large. The first sensor alerts flashed on the Vorak command deck. They showed multiple small contacts approaching at high speed. The contacts were too numerous and too dispersed for efficient targeting. The Vorak tactical systems began recalculating threat priorities. Humanity's fleet was now fully committed. They flew toward the 3 giants without hesitation. Their strategy was simple. They would not meet strength with strength. They would attack where the Vorak were not looking. Dr. Lisa Parker watched the sensor feeds from her station deep within the Lunar Command Center. The screens showed the 3 Vorak warships as perfect geometric shapes against the starfield. Their surfaces reflected no light. They absorbed everything. The rest of the room hummed with low voices and nervous energy. She remained still, her eyes tracing the lines of the alien vessels. She saw them not as monsters but as artifacts. Their design showed a single-minded purpose. Every curve served a defensive function. Every angle minimized target profiles. They were built to withstand tremendous force from specific directions. Their weapon ports clustered in predictable formations. The pattern repeated across all 3 ships with mathematical precision. This was not organic growth. This was engineered perfection. Their tactical behavior confirmed her analysis. The Vorak ships maintained rigid formation. They did not maneuver aggressively. They held position and relied on their overwhelming firepower. They presented their strongest armor facing the anticipated threat axis. They reacted to attacks with standardized protocols. Their responses were efficient, predictable, and utterly rigid. Parker compared them to historical siege engines. They were designed to break fortresses and smash fleets in direct confrontations. Their entire doctrine assumed an enemy would meet them head-on. They expected honor-bound declarations of war. They anticipated formal challenges and set-piece battles. Their technology had evolved to perfect this single form of combat. Humanity had no such traditions. Human military history was a chronicle of asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, psychological operations, deception and misdirection, winning through any means necessary. Parker saw this not as a weakness but as their greatest advantage. The Vorak were masters of one game. Humans had spent millennia learning every game. The Vorak armor was their proudest feature. It could shrug off nuclear blasts and particle beams, but that strength created a critical vulnerability. The armor required massive structural support. It limited their maneuverability. It forced them to move as slow, deliberate behemoths. They could not turn quickly. They could not pursue small, fast targets effectively. Their targeting systems were equally specialized. They were optimized for large, energy-rich signatures. They filtered out small, low-energy contacts as background noise. The human ships fell below their threat thresholds. The Vorak sensors literally could not see them as primary combatants until they were already striking. Parker began typing a rapid analysis. Her fingers moved across the keyboard without hesitation. She outlined the Vorak doctrinal limitations in clear, concise terms. She described them as a species that had achieved perfection in one narrow specialty. They had become the ultimate hammer in a universe where every problem looked like a nail. Humanity was not a nail. They were water. They would flow around the hammer. They would seek every crack and crevice. They would wear down the structure through persistent, unpredictable pressure. They would attack where the hammer was not designed to strike. She sent her analysis to Captain Morrison's command feed. The document was 8 pages long. It contained no emotional appeals. It was pure tactical assessment. It reframed the entire conflict from a battle of strength to a test of adaptability. The Vorak were not evil conquerors. They were limited specialists who had never encountered true generalists. Morrison read the summary on his command screen. He nodded slowly. He saw the truth in her assessment. The Vorak were trapped by their own excellence. They had become so good at one thing they had forgotten how to do anything else. Their strength had become their cage. He forwarded the analysis to all ship captains. The document included specific tactical recommendations. It advised attacking from multiple unexpected vectors simultaneously. It suggested using the Vorak's own sensor filters against them. It proposed maneuvers that exploited their limited turning radius and reaction times. The human fleet adjusted its approach patterns. Ships began moving in erratic, unpredictable courses. They used planetary gravity wells and asteroid debris for cover. They approached from angles the Vorak armor was not optimized to defend. They became harder to track, harder to target, harder to predict. Parker watched the new sensor data flow across her screens. The human ships now moved like insects around sleeping giants. They darted in, struck vulnerable points, and retreated before the Vorak could respond effectively. The Vorak weapons fired at empty space. Their targeting systems struggled to acquire the fast-moving targets. The battle was no longer about matching strength against strength. It was about finding the gaps in their perfection. It was about using their rigid predictability against them. The humans fought like water wearing down stone, persistent, patient, inevitable. Parker finally leaned back in her chair. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She had given them the key. Now, they had to turn it in the lock. The first human ships reached engagement distance. They did not fire their weapons. They launched sensor jammers and electromagnetic pulse emitters. Small canisters tumbled toward the Vorak vessels. They exploded silently, releasing clouds of charged particles. The Vorak sensor arrays flickered. Targeting solutions dissolved into static. The giant warships paused their weapons cycle. Their systems recalibrated automatically. The Vorak targeting computers searched for conventional threat signatures. They looked for large energy readings and predictable attack vectors. The human ships registered as minor anomalies. Their engine signatures fell below primary threat thresholds. Their movements lacked military precision. They weaved and dodged like natural phenomena. The targeting systems classified them as space debris or sensor artifacts. They received low-priority status, a Vorak beam weapon fired. It was a massive energy discharge capable of melting through planetary crust. It sliced through space where a human mining ship had been seconds before. The ship was already gone. It had used the moon's gravity to slingshot into a new trajectory. The beam hit nothing but vacuum. The energy dissipated harmlessly. The weapon required 30 seconds to recharge. Human pilots communicated through tight beam bursts. They shared positional data and timing coordinates. Their movements appeared random to external observers. In reality, they followed complex mathematical patterns. They used chaotic algorithms to predict each other's positions. They moved like a school of fish avoiding a predator. Each pilot reacted to the other's movements instantly. There was no central command during engagements, only shared understanding. They used every environmental advantage available. Some ships hid in the radar shadow of asteroid fragments. Others used Jupiter's magnetic field to mask their engine signatures. A few even skimmed the upper atmosphere of Io, using volcanic plumes for cover. Their small size allowed them to navigate terrain the Vorak ships could not approach. They turned obstacles into shields. The battle became a dance of light and shadow. Human ships darted in from unexpected angles. They fired concentrated laser bursts at sensor clusters and weapon emitters. Their attacks did little physical damage. They scratched the surface of the alien armor. But each strike forced the Vorak systems to recalculate. Each minor impact registered as a systems alert. The warships began responding to phantom threats. A Vorak point defense system activated. It targeted a cluster of sensor decoys launched from a human vessel. The decoys mimicked engine signatures and heat profiles. The Vorak lasers vaporized them efficiently. Meanwhile, 3 actual ships approached from the blind spot created by the distraction. They fired precision shots at communication arrays. The hits were not crippling. They were annoying, like insects buzzing around a creature's head. The Vorak command deck showed multiple warning indicators. Secondary systems reported minor damage across all 3 ships. The main weapons remained operational. The structural integrity was uncompromised. But the constant stream of small alerts created confusion. The tactical officers struggled to determine which threats were real. Their interface was designed for clear combat scenarios, not this persistent low-level harassment. Tsar watched his display with growing frustration. His ships were built to withstand frontal assaults from equal opponents. They were designed to break enemy formations with overwhelming force. They had no protocols for this kind of fighting. His officers kept requesting permission to launch fighters. He denied each request. The human ships were too small and too fast. His fighters would be equally ineffective against them. Dr. Lisa Parker observed the mixed crews working in the simulation chamber. Human and Vorak officers stood side by side at control consoles. Their body languages remained distinct. Humans gestured while speaking. Vorak stood perfectly still. But their voices blended in coordinated commands. Parker watched the fundamental difference between them unfold in real time. She saw it not as a barrier but as a key to understanding. The Vorak's evolutionary history shaped their approach to conflict. They were apex predators from a high-gravity world. Their biology and technology reflected singular specialization. They had perfected the art of conquest through overwhelming force. Their ships were impenetrable fortresses. Their weapons could vaporize continents. Their tactics followed precise mathematical models. This specialization made them masters of a specific type of warfare. It also made them vulnerable to anything outside that narrow scope. Parker compared them to a knife honed to perfect sharpness. It could slice through any material with effortless precision, but it could only cut. It could not hammer or pry or screw. Its excellence in one function limited its versatility. The Vorak were that knife. They had become so specialized in predation that they had forgotten other ways of existing. Their strength had become their cage. Humans represented the opposite evolutionary path. They were generalists by nature. Their homeworld presented constantly changing challenges. They adapted to diverse environments through flexibility and tool use. They fought with whatever was available. They turned obstacles into advantages. Their strength came not from perfection in one area but from competence in many. They integrated tools, ideas, and relationships in unpredictable ways. The mixed crews began developing a hybrid language. It blended Vorak mathematical precision with human intuitive shorthand. They created new terms that didn't exist in either language alone. A human would gesture toward a sensor display. A Vorak would input coordinate data. Together they would generate solutions neither could reach individually. Their communication became faster, more efficient, more creative. They designed strategies that defied traditional classification. A Vorak officer would propose a perfectly calculated attack vector. A human would suggest using asteroid debris for cover. The combined approach leveraged both strengths. The Vorak provided the precision. The humans provided the adaptability. The results were neither purely human nor Vorak. They were something new, something more effective. Parker watched a simulation where a mixed crew faced overwhelming odds. The scenario was designed to be unwinnable. The Vorak officers initially assessed the situation as hopeless. Their training taught them to surrender when victory was mathematically impossible. The human officers immediately began looking for alternatives. They asked what resources were available. They considered unconventional options. The two approaches collided, then merged. The Vorak provided detailed analysis of enemy capabilities. The humans devised ways to turn those capabilities against them. They created a strategy that used the enemy's strength as a weakness. They didn't try to win through superior force. They aimed to win through superior understanding. After the simulation, the crew debriefed together. A Vorak officer asked why humans continued fighting when victory seemed impossible. A human lieutenant responded with simple clarity. She said it was about the will to keep fighting when everything looks hopeless. The phrase hung in the air between them. The Vorak officers processed this concept. It was alien to their doctrine, yet it resonated with something deeper. That phrase became their shared creed. It represented the fusion of their strengths. The Vorak brought mathematical certainty. The humans brought unwavering determination. Together they created a new kind of resilience, one based on both calculation and spirit. This became the engine of their progress, a power born from collaboration rather than domination. Parker finally understood the true transformation happening. It wasn't just about military tactics. It was about evolutionary paths merging. The specialists and the generalists were learning from each other. They were creating something that transcended both approaches. Their future would be built on this fusion, on the recognition that true strength lies not in perfection but in adaptation, not in singularity but in integration. The simulation chamber emptied. Human and Vorak officers walked out together. They discussed the exercise in their blended language. Their voices echoed in the corridor. Parker watched them go. She saw the beginning of something that would change both species forever. The generalist's edge had met the specialist's precision. Together they were becoming something entirely new. The combined fleet drifted above Mars. The ships were hybrids now. Human design philosophies blended with Vorak materials science. Their hulls showed both angular human lines and organic Vorak curves. The command structures were mixed. Human captains served with Vorak first officers. Vorak engineers worked alongside human technicians. They were no longer two fleets. They were one entity with a shared purpose. The galaxy watched this transformation with suspicion. Old conflicts still defined interstellar politics. Many species saw the alliance through the lens of past wars. They remembered the Vorak as relentless conquerors. They viewed humans as unpredictable primitives. The combined fleet represented something new and unsettling. It challenged established power dynamics. It offered a different model of strength. They faced their first test when a nomadic raider fleet approached settled systems. The raiders followed traditional patterns of predation. They sought weak targets. They relied on surprise and overwhelming force. The Alliance fleet responded with a new doctrine. They did not engage in head-on combat. They used coordinated maneuvers that blended human adaptability with Vorak precision. The raiders found themselves facing an opponent that defied categorization. The Alliance ships moved in patterns that made no tactical sense. They sacrificed perfect formation for optimal positioning. They used environmental factors as weapons. They turned the raiders' strength against them. The confrontation ended without massive destruction. The raiders withdrew, confused and outmaneuvered. This victory demonstrated the Alliance's new approach. They were not conquerors seeking territory. They were not victims defending borders. They were protectors of a new idea. Their strength came from integration rather than domination. They had forged their power through shared vulnerability and mutual education. They had learned from each other's weaknesses as much as from each other's strengths. The Vorak had discovered the value of flexibility. They had learned that perfect systems could become prisons. They had embraced the human capacity for improvisation. The humans had gained understanding of advanced technology and strategic discipline. They had incorporated Vorak precision into their adaptive approaches. The fusion created something more durable than either species could achieve alone. Their strength was redefined. It was no longer about raw power or perfect armor. It was about the ability to learn and adapt. It was about curiosity overcoming obstacles that brute force could not break. They had proven that resilience could outlast even the most overwhelming force. This represented a fundamental shift in how strength was measured in a hostile universe. The story of their war became a teaching tool across both cultures. It was studied not as a military campaign but as a case study in transformation. Cadets learned about the initial mathematical exchange. They analyzed the Battle of Jupiter not for its tactics but for its psychological impact. They studied Medic Turner's decision to aid a wounded enemy. They examined Kevin Hayes' survival on Titan as an example of human resilience. The lesson was clear across both species. The strongest were not those who never fell. They were those who learned how to get back up. The Vorak had fallen into stagnation despite their perfect record. Humans had faced countless setbacks throughout their history. Together they had discovered that true strength lies in the ability to learn from failure and adapt. The Alliance now faced the cosmos as a unified entity. They would encounter unknown threats and unexplored regions together. Their combined approach gave them tools no single species could possess. They could approach problems with both meticulous planning and creative improvisation. They could build on both specialization and generalization. The transformation was ongoing. There were still cultural misunderstandings. There were still moments of tension. But the foundation held. They had moved beyond the old categories of conqueror and conquered. They had created a new model based on mutual growth and shared purpose. The galaxy continued to watch. Some species remained skeptical. Others began to see the value in this new approach. The Alliance represented a different path forward, one that valued adaptation over domination, one that saw strength in collaboration rather than in solitary power. Their story became a beacon for other civilizations. It showed that even the most bitter enemies could find common ground. It demonstrated that the willingness to learn could transform conflict into cooperation. The strongest were indeed those who could fall and rise again, changed but not broken, carrying forward the lessons of their struggles. A human shuttle made a close pass along the hull of Tsar's flagship. It was so near its metal skin scraped against the alien armor. The contact triggered proximity alerts across multiple decks. The shuttle fired its maneuvering thrusters and veered away. It left a faint scar on the perfect surface. The act was meaningless militarily. Psychologically, it was a declaration. The Vorak communications officer reported another problem. The constant sensor interference was disrupting their internal networks. Crew members on different decks were experiencing minor delays in system responses. The effect was cumulative, like water dripping on stone. It was not disabling. It was deeply unsettling for a species that valued perfect efficiency. Tsar finally understood the human strategy. They were not trying to destroy his ships. They were trying to overwhelm their decision-making capacity. They were exploiting the gap between perfect design and practical adaptation. His vessels could withstand any weapon humanity possessed, but they could not handle 1,000 tiny problems occurring simultaneously. The command deck fell silent. The officers stopped reporting every minor alert. They simply watched their screens. The constant flicker of warning lights created a strange rhythm. It was the sound of a system being stressed in ways its designers never anticipated. The Vorak had never experienced combat like this. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. Sergeant Tony Rodriguez floated through the breach. His magnetic boots clamped onto the alien metal with soft clicks. The air felt cold and still. His team followed in tight formation. Their plasma torches had cut a precise hole in the Vorak hull. The edges still glowed orange. They moved into the darkness without speaking. Their mission parameters were clear. Infiltrate the secondary engineering section. Plant-shaped charges on primary power conduits. Target life support regulators. Sabotage communication relays. Withdraw before detection. The explosives were small but precisely calibrated. They would not destroy the ship. They would cripple critical systems. The goal was disruption, not demolition. The interior stretched away into shadow. Polished black metal formed every surface. There were no sharp corners. Everything curved smoothly into everything else. The architecture felt organic, like the inside of a giant insect. Strange symbols glowed faintly on control panels. The air hummed with low-frequency vibrations. Rodriguez signaled his team to spread out. They moved with practiced silence. They encountered no guards, no patrols, no internal security systems. The Vorak had never envisioned borders. Their ships were fortresses designed to keep threats outside. The concept of enemy personnel moving through their corridors was alien to their doctrine. Rodriguez felt the absence of resistance more unnerving than combat would have been. Every shadow felt like a trap waiting to spring. Specialist Chen located the primary power conduit. It was a thick crystalline tube running along the ceiling. Blue energy pulsed within it. She attached a shaped charge to its surface. The magnetic clamp sealed with a faint hiss. She set the timer for 30 minutes. The charge was designed to fracture the conduit without causing a catastrophic breach. It would disrupt power distribution to weapon systems. Corporal Davis found the life support control node. It was a complex array of shimmering metal fins. They hummed as they processed atmosphere. He placed 2 small explosives at key junction points. The detonation would force the system into emergency shutdown. The Vorak would need to activate backup systems. It would create confusion and divert engineering resources. They moved deeper into the ship. The layout was a labyrinth of identical corridors. There were no signs or directional markers. The Vorak likely navigated by other means, perhaps scent trails or low-frequency signals. The humans relied on inertial trackers and memorized schematics. Rodriguez checked his position display. They were nearing the communication relay hub. They found it behind a seamless door. Rodriguez used his plasma torch to cut through the metal. The process took 90 seconds. The smell of vaporized metal filled the corridor. They entered a room filled with crystalline structures. They pulsed with soft light. Data streams flowed through them like liquid. Specialist Meeks planted the final charges on the main relay crystal. The explosion would scramble their internal communications for hours. They completed the mission in 22 minutes. They encountered no Vorak crew members. The ship felt empty. Perhaps the crew were at battle stations elsewhere. Perhaps they simply didn't patrol these areas. Rodriguez signaled the withdrawal. They retraced their path to the breach. Their magnetic boots made no sound on the smooth metal. They exited through the cut hull section. The void welcomed them back. Rodriguez triggered his suit thrusters. His team fell into formation behind him. They moved away from the Vorak ship. The charges detonated exactly on schedule. Inside the ship, the explosions were not loud. They were precise controlled events. The power conduit fractured. Blue energy arced across the ceiling. The life support system went into emergency mode. Atmospheric processors shut down. The communication relays emitted chaotic interference. Internal comms dissolved into static. The Vorak command deck registered the damage instantly. Secondary systems flared red on their displays. Tsar received reports of internal explosions. His first thought was systems malfunction. Then he saw the pattern. The damage was too targeted, too strategic. It could not be accidental. Someone had been inside his ship. The realization struck him with physical force. They had breached his hull. They had walked his corridors. They had planted explosives in his most sensitive areas. They had done it without being detected. They had left without confrontation. The Vorak warriors looked at each other. Their multifaceted eyes reflected shared understanding. Their fortress was not impregnable. Their sanctuary was vulnerable. An enemy had been among them. The concept was so foreign it took moments to process. The psychological impact outweighed the physical damage. The Vorak had never experienced violation of their personal space. Their ships were extensions of their bodies. This was not combat. This was intrusion. This was a form of warfare their codes didn't address. Tsar stared at the damage reports. The humans had changed the rules again. They had moved the battlefield inside his walls. Nothing was safe anymore. Medic Sam Turner watched the secondary explosion rip through the Vorak warship's hull. The detonation was not large. It was precise. It tore open a section of armor near the engineering sector. The edges glowed white-hot. Debris drifted slowly into space. Turner's shuttle hung 200 meters from the breach. His scanners showed multiple life signs inside. Most were fading rapidly. One remained strong but trapped. Protocol was clear. Maintain distance. Monitor for threats. Report the damage assessment. The Vorak were still the enemy. Their warriors were bred for combat. They could survive wounds that would kill a human. Approaching a damaged warship was suicide. Turner listened to the mission control channel. They were discussing tactical advantages gained by the explosion. No one mentioned the life signs. He saw movement in the wreckage. A Vorak warrior struggled against a collapsed support beam. The metal pinned its lower body. Its chitinous arms scraped against the debris. The motion was desperate. Turner enhanced his visual feed. The warrior's multifaceted eyes caught the light from his sensors. They showed no fear, only focused intensity. It was trying to free itself with systematic repeated motions. Turner keyed his comm. He reported the trapped warrior to command. The response was immediate. Maintain position. Do not approach. The warrior represented an unknown threat level. Its systems might still be active. Its weapons could still function. The risk assessment came back negative. The calculated probability of successful rescue was 0. The probability of ambush was high. He disconnected his shuttle's safety locks. The system beeped a warning. He ignored it. His hands moved across the controls. He positioned the shuttle closer to the breach. The torn metal edges filled his viewport. He could see details now. The warrior's armor was cracked. A dark fluid leaked from the fractures. Its movements were becoming weaker. Turner assembled his medkit. He selected cutting tools and biosealant patches. He did not take a weapon. His environment suit sealed with a hiss. The airlock cycled. He floated toward the breach. His magnetic boots connected with the Vorak hull. The metal felt strangely warm through his soles. The interior was a chaos of twisted supports and shattered crystals. Energy conduits sparked where they had been severed. The air smelled of ozone and something organic. Turner moved toward the trapped warrior. His lights illuminated the scene. The warrior stopped struggling. Its eyes tracked his approach. It made no aggressive moves. It simply watched. He used his plasma cutter on the beam pinning the warrior. The metal glowed and parted. Sparks reflected in the warrior's eyes. The cutting process took 3 minutes. The warrior remained perfectly still during the operation. It did not try to attack. It observed Turner's movements with intense focus. When the beam was cut, Turner used his tools to lift it away. The warrior's lower body was crushed. The damage was severe. Turner applied biosealant to the worst fractures. The substance hardened instantly. It would stabilize the injuries temporarily. The warrior made a low clicking sound. It might have been pain or acknowledgement. Turner's comm crackled. His commanding officer demanded an explanation. The voice was sharp with tension. Turner kept working as he responded. He described the situation in calm medical terms. The officer asked why he would risk his life for an enemy combatant. The question hung in the static-filled silence. Turner finished applying the sealant. He looked at the warrior's face. The multifaceted eyes showed his own reflection distorted across their surfaces. He keyed his comm again. His voice was even. Without emphasis because you were hurt. It's what we do. The simplicity of the statement carried through the comm channel. The officer fell silent. The warrior made another clicking sound. Softer this time. It raised one damaged arm. Not in threat. In a gesture that might have been examination. Or gratitude. Turner secured the area around the warrior. He marked its position for recovery. He returned to his shuttle. The entire operation had taken 12 minutes. He had violated multiple protocols. He had exposed himself to unacceptable risk. He had provided medical aid to an enemy soldier. The psychological impact spread through both fleets. Human Command debated disciplinary action. Vorak Command received the sensor footage. They analyzed the event from every angle. They could find no tactical advantage in the action. No deception. No hidden purpose. Only a medic doing his job. The warrior survived. It was recovered by its own people hours later. It reported the incident through official channels. The description was factual, unemotional. It included the medic's final statement verbatim. That statement became a point of discussion in Vorak strategy sessions. They had encountered mercy before from conquered species, always as surrender, always as weakness. This was different. This was mercy offered from a position of strength. This was care given without expectation of reciprocity. The act defied their understanding of conflict. It introduced a variable their tactical computers could not process. It suggested a form of strength they had not accounted for. A strength that could choose compassion when destruction was easier. Turner returned to duty. He did not speak of the incident again, but his actions had already begun changing the equation of the war. They had shown the Vorak something their perfect logic had never considered. That humanity's greatest weapon might not be their ships or their tactics, but their refusal to become what they fought against. Kevin Hayes woke to freezing darkness. His body ached. His ship lay scattered around him in pieces. The wreckage glittered under Titan's dim light. His environment suit warned of multiple breaches. The internal temperature read -180 Celsius. His oxygen supply showed critical levels. He had a broken arm. The pain was a sharp constant. He took inventory of his situation without panic. He was alone on a moon hostile to human life. A Vorak warship orbited above him. His chances of survival were effectively zero. He did not transmit a distress call. He did not beg for rescue. He began moving. His training took over. He located the largest piece of wreckage. It was a section of the cargo hold. The hull plating was still intact. He used his good arm to drag usable materials toward it. He worked through the pain. His breath fogged his helmet visor. The cold seeped through his damaged suit. He built a shelter against an ice cliff. He used shattered plating for walls. He salvaged insulation from shredded cargo. He connected a broken pipe to a functioning filter. It became a water recycler. He rigged the ship's surviving power cells to a heating coil. It generated enough warmth to prevent freezing. He even created a small garden using salvaged dirt and nutrient packets. These actions were not just about survival. They were about maintaining purpose. They were about asserting control in a hopeless situation, Captain Zar observed from orbit. His sensors tracked the humans' movements. He watched the shelter take shape. He saw the heat signature stabilize. He expected desperation. He saw determined progress. This was not the behavior of a defeated creature. This was systematic adaptation. Zar decided to descend to the surface personally. He wanted to witness this human's final moments up close. Zar's shuttle landed without sound on the frozen plain. He emerged wearing a protective suit. The human stood waiting outside the shelter. He did not raise his hands. He did not attempt to flee. He simply watched Zar approach. His posture showed fatigue but not fear. His eyes were calm. Zar spoke through his translator. His voice emerged as a flat digital tone. He asked why the human had not surrendered. He asked why he continued to struggle against certain death. He expected a plea for mercy, or defiant last words. Hayes looked at the Vorak commander. His face was pale from cold and blood loss. His voice was steady when he answered. He said he was afraid. He admitted his fear of never seeing his family again. He confessed his fear of dying before telling them he loved them one more time. But he stated clearly that fear changed nothing. It did not stop the need to act. It did not erase the obligation to try. Zar listened without interruption. This was not the response his tactical models predicted. This was not the logic of conquest or surrender. This was something else entirely, something his people had never encountered in all their campaigns. Hayes continued. He explained the core of human resistance. It was not about strength or weakness. It was not about victory or defeat. It was about fighting for each other. It was about protecting the things they loved. This was the engine that drove their stubborn defiance. This was why they rebuilt shelters on frozen moons. This was why they refused to yield even when outmatched. They fought for connections. They fought for meaning. Zar stood silent for a long moment. The wind whipped frozen methane crystals against his faceplate. He had come to witness an execution. He was instead witnessing a demonstration of a philosophy his people had forgotten, or perhaps never learned. Strength was not about domination. It was about purpose. It was about having something worth protecting. He did not order Hayes's death. He did not return to his ship immediately. He asked a single question. His voice lost its commanding edge. It became curious, almost hesitant. What makes something worth protecting? Hayes looked toward the small garden he had built inside his shelter. The plants were already dying in the extreme cold. But he had built it anyway. He had tried. The question hung between them in the freezing air. It was not a tactical query. It was not a strategic assessment. It was the beginning of a conversation that would change everything. Zar turned and walked back to his shuttle. He left the human alive on the frozen moon. He carried a new question back to his command deck. A question without an immediate answer. A question that would eventually change the course of the war. Commander Zar returned to his command deck. The frozen plains of Titan still seemed to linger in his vision. Kevin Hayes' words echoed in his mind. They did not fade like normal sound. They repeated with precise clarity. He dismissed his officers with a gesture. He needed to review the battle records alone. The consoles glowed with tactical data. He pulled up the archives of their conquests. 17 worlds appeared on his main display. Each victory was documented in meticulous detail. He saw the same pattern repeated across a century of expansion. A Vorak fleet would arrive. They would issue their mathematical ultimatum. The native species would surrender within hours, sometimes minutes. There was never significant resistance, never meaningful combat. The campaigns were swift, efficient, and utterly hollow. He examined the data from a new perspective. He looked beyond the tactical victories. He studied the cultural impact on his own people. The victories required no innovation. They demanded no adaptation. Each conquest used identical strategies. The Vorak military doctrine had not evolved in 50 years. They had become perfect at solving problems they had already solved. They were the strongest, but they had forgotten what strength was for. Their existence had become a repetitive cycle. They would find a new world. They would conquer it using proven methods. They would absorb its resources. Then they would move to the next target. The process offered no growth, no new challenges, no opportunities to learn. They were predators in a universe without other predators. They had eliminated all competition. They had made themselves alone. He compared this to the human conflict. The humans had refused their ultimatum. They had fought with unpredictable tactics. They had boarded his ships. They had shown mercy to wounded warriors. They had survived on frozen moons through pure ingenuity. They had demonstrated qualities the Vorak had lost, perhaps never possessed. Humanity was offering them something precious. Not surrender, not resources, challenge. The humans were forcing the Vorak to adapt, to think differently, to question their assumptions. This conflict was the first real test they had faced in generations. It was painful. It was difficult. It was also invigorating. Tsar understood the paradox. Their perfect record of victories had become their greatest weakness. The lack of challenge had made them stagnant. Their strength had made them rigid. They had conquered 17 worlds but gained nothing of value from them. No new strategies, no new perspectives, no growth as a species. They were trapped in their own perfection. He looked at the sensor display showing the human fleet. Their ships were still maneuvering in their chaotic patterns. They were still fighting despite being outmatched. They were still adapting and learning. They were everything the Vorak were not, and everything they needed to become. The realization settled deep within him. They were not conquerors. They were students who had lost their way. They had confused domination with progress. They had mistaken victory for growth. They needed to rediscover the purpose of strength. Not to take, but to learn. Not to conquer, but to understand. He made his decision. The objective shifted completely. Domination was no longer the goal. Understanding became the new priority. They would stop trying to break humanity. They would start trying to comprehend it. He moved to the communication console. His hands entered the commands with deliberate slowness. This transmission would break every protocol. It would defy their entire military tradition. It would acknowledge weakness to an enemy. It was the most dangerous thing he had ever done. The message formed on his screen. It contained no mathematical proofs of superiority. It issued no threats or ultimatums. It asked a single question in the universal language of mathematics. It was a request for knowledge, a request for teaching. He reviewed the message one final time. It was perfect in its simplicity. It was terrifying in its implications. It represented everything his people had forgotten how to do. It was the first step toward becoming something new, something better. He pressed the transmit key. The message traveled toward the human fleet at light speed. It would reach them in minutes. The war was over. Something else was beginning. The transmission came through on the primary diplomatic channel. The decryption algorithm ran its course. Captain Morrison watched the screen. He expected a declaration of renewed hostilities. He anticipated final surrender terms. The translation finalized. The text was not a demand. It was a question. Morrison read it twice. His mind struggled to process the content. It did not compute. The message asked for a ceasefire. It requested that humans teach them. The phrasing was simple. The meaning was immense. Tsar's words appeared on the display with stark clarity. You have something we need to learn. The statement was an admission of lack, a confession of need. This was not a tactical feint. It was a complete reversal of roles. The Vorak were asking the species they had come to conquer to become their mentors. They sought instruction in warfare and something more elusive. something spiritual. This challenged their entire cultural identity. Their society was built on conquest and dominance. Submission was alien to them. Yet here they were, submitting a request for knowledge. Earth's leadership convened an emergency session. Views were sharply divided. Military advisors argued it was a trap, a deception to lower their guard. They cited historical precedents of false surrenders. They recommended immediate rejection. Civilian analysts saw an unprecedented opportunity. They pointed to the consistency of Vorak behavior. Their actions had shown genuine confusion. Their rigid thinking made complex deception unlikely. Dr. Sarah Kim observed the debate from her station. She was a cultural xenologist. Her specialty was first contact scenarios. She had studied the Vorak transmission patterns. She noted the subtle shifts in their mathematical language. The request contained humility markers never before seen in their communications. This was not a trick. It was a genuine epistemological crisis. She was appointed lead ambassador. Her first task was to understand this new reality. She established a communication link with Tsar's command ship. Their initial exchange was formal. She asked clarifying questions. He provided direct answers. The Vorak sought to understand human resilience. They wanted to learn their adaptive strategies. They needed to comprehend why humans fought for things beyond survival. The dialogue expanded rapidly. It moved beyond military tactics. They began discussing philosophy, psychology, social structures. The Vorak asked about human concepts of loyalty and sacrifice. They inquired about the drive to protect others. They sought to understand the source of human creativity and problem-solving. Kim explained that human strength came from their generalist nature. They were adaptable across many environments. They could use many tools for many purposes. The Vorak were specialists, perfect at one thing, limited in all others. This was the core of what they needed to learn: how to be flexible, how to think beyond established patterns. The Vorak listening teams processed this information. They began to see their own limitations clearly. Their perfection in predation had become a trap. They needed to learn how to learn again, how to grow beyond their specialized nature. The war shifted its fundamental nature. It was no longer about winning or losing. It became about finding a new path forward together. The two species began building a framework for mutual education. They established protocols for information exchange. They created joint research teams. The ceasefire held without violation. Both sides maintained defensive postures. But the energy changed. The tension eased. Ships that had been trying to destroy each other now observed each other with curiosity. The void between them felt less hostile. Human instructors began preparing lesson plans. They would teach military tactics first. Then they would move to broader subjects. The Vorak provided their own databases for human study. The exchange became two-way. Both species had things to learn from each other. The transformation was unsettling for many. Warriors on both sides struggled with the new reality. They had been trained for combat, not for classroom instruction. They had to adapt to a new kind of engagement. One fought with ideas instead of weapons. Kim watched the process unfold. She saw the Vorak begin to ask different kinds of questions. They started inquiring about human art, music, literature. They wanted to understand what humans found beautiful, what they considered meaningful. The dialogue was becoming a true cultural exchange. The path forward was uncertain. There would be misunderstandings. There would be setbacks, but the direction was set. The two species were no longer enemies. They were potential partners in a strange new experiment. They were building something that had never existed before, an alliance based not on conquest but on mutual need for growth. The meeting chamber floated in neutral space between the fleets. It was a simple pressurized module with transparent walls. The stars shone on all sides. Captain Morrison entered from one airlock. Commander Tsar entered from the opposite side. They stood facing each other across a plain metal table. Their bodyguards remained outside. The two fleets hung motionless in the void beyond the glass. Weapons were powered down. Sensors observed. Nothing moved. Tsar spoke first. His translator emitted flat tones. He stated that his people had achieved perfect victory across 17 worlds. Each conquest followed the same pattern. Their supremacy was absolute. Their methods were flawless. He paused. The translation software struggled with the next concept. He said this perfection had become their weakness. The lack of challenge had made them stagnant. Their strength had hollowed their purpose. Morrison listened without interruption. He watched the Vorak commander's body language. The proud posture remained, but the words carried a new weight. They were not boasts, they were confessions. Tsar continued. He explained that they had come to Earth expecting another swift conquest. They had encountered something different, something their models could not process. They had found a species that refused to yield, a species that adapted, a species that fought for reasons beyond survival. He admitted they needed to learn this quality. They sought an opponent who could challenge them, not to defeat them, to teach them. They wanted to understand human resilience. They needed to comprehend the drive to protect others. This was not a military request. It was a cultural one. They were asking for instruction in how to be more than conquerors. Morrison considered his response. He spoke slowly. He said humanity's strength came from being generalists. They could adapt to many environments. They could use many tools. They fought for connections, for families, for ideas. Their history was written in adaptation, in overcoming impossible odds through creativity and stubbornness. They would share this knowledge, but it would require something from the Vorak in return. The negotiation lasted hours. They drafted terms without aides or lawyers. They spoke directly. The agreement was not a surrender document. It was a joint declaration of mutual education. It outlined technology sharing. But more importantly, it outlined knowledge exchange. Humans would teach adaptive thinking and asymmetric warfare. The Vorak would share their technological advancements. Both species would learn from each other. The document was signed with simple electronic signatures. There were no grand ceremonies, no dramatic gestures. The two commanders stood and faced each other. Tsar made a formal Vorak gesture of respect. Morrison returned a human salute. They turned and exited through their respective airlocks. The meeting chamber remained floating between the fleets, a silent monument to the new reality. The fleets began to move, not toward combat positions, toward coordinated orbital patterns. Human and Vorak ships aligned themselves in complementary formations. They established secure communication links. They began sharing basic technical data. The process was cautious, deliberate. Both sides monitored for deception. None came. The transformation was unsettling for veteran warriors. Soldiers who had been trying to kill each other now worked on joint projects. Technicians from both species collaborated on system integrations. The cultural differences were vast. The Vorak valued efficiency and precision. Humans valued creativity and adaptation. These differences became strengths when combined. The agreement created a framework for long-term cooperation. It established joint research initiatives. It set up cultural exchange programs. It planned for mixed crews on future vessels. The two civilizations were merging their approaches. They were creating something new. A blend of Vorak strength and human flexibility. A fusion of specialization and generalization. This was not a peace treaty between enemies. It was an alliance between complementary partners. They had found that their weaknesses matched each other's strengths. Their future would be built together, not through conquest, through mutual growth. The war had ended. The learning had just begun. The asteroid belt became neutral ground. The first human Vorak military academy occupied a repurposed mining station. Its corridors smelled of recycled air and fresh paint. Kevin Hayes walked those halls with a slight limp from his injuries. His Titan survival had given him a unique perspective. He understood both species in ways no one else did. His appointment as lead instructor made sense. He spoke with the quiet authority of lived experience. 50 human cadets stood alongside 50 Vorak warriors. The room felt tense. The two groups maintained careful distance. Their body languages were completely different. Humans shifted weight. Vorak stood perfectly still. Their multifaceted eyes watched everything. Hayes began the first session without ceremony. He said they would not discuss weapons or tactics today. They would discuss perspective. Vorak pilot Kresimar was the first to speak. His translator emitted a crisp digital tone. He asked Lieutenant Amy Foster how humans achieved their battlefield coordination. He had studied the sensor logs from the Jupiter engagement. The human movements appeared random, illogical, yet they produced effective results. He could not reconcile the chaos with the outcomes. His question was genuine curiosity. Foster considered her response. She did not offer a technical explanation about communication networks or algorithms. She gave him an analogy instead. Her voice was calm. She told him to imagine trying to catch a swarm of bees with his bare hands, then to ask the question again. The Vorak warriors processed this. Their translators remained silent. They were motionless. The analogy was not about bees. It was about systems. It was about the difference between controlling individual elements and understanding emergent behavior. The humans did not direct each ship. They created conditions where the right actions emerged naturally. Kresimar finally responded. He said the Vorak military saw battlefields as chessboards. Each piece had defined moves and values. The goal was to capture key pieces through superior strategy. Human tactics made no sense within that framework. They seemed to ignore the board entirely. Foster nodded. She said humans saw battlefields as ecosystems. Everything was connected. Everything could be used. An asteroid was not an obstacle. It was cover. A gravity well was not a navigation hazard. It was a weapon. Their coordination came from shared understanding, not from central command. They adapted to the environment in real time. They turned constraints into advantages. The Vorak cadets began asking different questions. They inquired about human decision-making under pressure. They wanted to understand how individuals could act independently while maintaining group cohesion. The humans explained through examples rather than theories. They described historical battles. They talked about emergency responses. They shared stories of overcoming impossible odds through improvisation. The training exercises became practical applications. Mixed teams solved complex problems together. Humans showed the Vorak how to use environmental factors, how to think creatively about resources. The Vorak demonstrated their disciplined approach to systems analysis. Their methodical precision complemented human adaptability. They ran simulations in the asteroid field. Human and Vorak pilots flew together. They developed new maneuvers that combined their strengths. The Vorak learned to appreciate chaos as a tool. The humans learned the value of precision in certain contexts. They began creating a hybrid doctrine, something neither species could have developed alone. The academy transformed from a training ground into a laboratory. Every exercise produced new insights. The cultural exchange became as important as the tactical training. They shared meals. They learned each other's languages. They discussed their histories and values. The initial tension faded into mutual respect. Hayes watched the progress from his observation deck. He saw the two species beginning to understand each other, not just as allies but as complementary partners. Their differences were becoming strengths. The academy was working. It was building the foundation for everything that would follow. The future of both species would be written in these corridors.